Emperor Vorith of the Draconian Empire had ruled 17 star systems for 3 centuries. His scales gleamed like polished obsidian under the twin suns of his homeworld. When he roared, the sound could shatter reinforced steel plating on battleships. He was power incarnate, the most feared ruler in the known galaxy. Every species that heard his name either bowed in respect or trembled in fear. When news spread that an heir was finally coming, the entire galaxy held its breath. For centuries, Vorith had waited for this moment. Dragon eggs took decades to develop, and this one had been carefully guarded in the royal incubation chamber. The day of hatching was declared a galactic holiday. Representatives from every star system traveled to the homeworld to witness the birth of the next emperor. The celebration lasted exactly 4 hours. Prince RYX emerged from his crystalline egg much smaller than anyone expected. His body was barely the size of a house cat. His wings hung limp against his sides, folded at odd angles that made the royal physician's expressions darken immediately. The crowd that had been cheering moments before fell silent. Something was wrong. Everyone could see it. The imperial physicians moved quickly. They surrounded the tiny hatchling with scanning equipment, their devices humming and beeping as they analyzed every inch of the newborn prince. The results came back within minutes, and the head physician's face went pale. He approached Emperor Vorith with trembling hands, carrying a data tablet that glowed with ominous red warnings. The verdict was devastating. The prince's wing muscles were severely underdeveloped, almost malformed. His flame sacs, the organs that allowed dragons to breathe fire, showed absolutely no activity. They were cold and dormant. In draconian culture, this wasn't just a disability. It was a death sentence. For 10,000 years, tradition had been clear and brutal. Weak hatchlings were left on the frozen mountainside to die. It was considered a mercy, a way to spare them from a life of shame and weakness. Emperor Vorith stood frozen, staring down at his tiny son. The hatchling looked up at him with golden eyes, confused and already frightened by the tension in the room. This was his only child. After waiting for centuries, after hoping and planning for an heir, this moment should have been the happiest of his long life. Instead, it felt like a nightmare. The court expected him to follow tradition. General Draven and the High Council were already whispering among themselves, preparing the ritual words that would condemn the hatchling. But Vorith couldn't do it. He couldn't look at his son and sentence him to death before he'd even taken his first real breath. For the first time in his 300-year reign, Emperor Vorith broke with tradition. He shocked everyone by ordering the physicians to step back. Then he did something that made the entire court gasp in disbelief. He opened his personal communicator and posted a listing on the Galactic Caregiver Network, bypassing every draconian specialist in the Empire. He was asking for outside help. From other species. It was unthinkable. Halfway across the galaxy, on Earth Colony 7, Kate Miller was sitting in her small apartment drinking her morning coffee. She'd been a childcare specialist for 15 years, working with difficult cases that other professionals gave up on. Kids with developmental delays, behavioral problems, trauma histories. She'd seen it all and helped most of them thrive. But lately she'd been feeling restless, like she needed a new challenge. When the job posting appeared on her screen, she almost spat out her coffee. The Draconian Empire was looking for a caregiver. The pay was astronomical, more money than she'd make in 10 years of regular work. But the warning message was crystal clear and honestly terrifying. Previous caregivers had already failed. The position came with the possibility of sudden termination. The listing didn't say it directly, but Kate could read between the lines. This wasn't just a difficult job. It was dangerous. She stared at the posting for exactly 10 minutes. Then she hit the accept button before she could talk herself out of it. 3 days later, Kate stepped off the transport ship onto the Draconian homeworld. The palace was massive, carved from black volcanic stone that seemed to absorb light. Guards twice her height escorted her through corridors lined with ancient weapons and battle trophies. She could hear shouting before she even reached the royal nursery. When the doors opened, she found complete chaos. 3 draconian nursemaids were arguing loudly in the hallway, their voices harsh and frustrated. A 4th pushed past Kate in tears, muttering something about impossible situations and wasted time. The room itself was enormous, designed for a creature much larger than what Kate found inside. In the center of a massive platinum nest sat the smallest dragon Kate had ever seen. Prince RX was no bigger than a cat, his scales a dull gray instead of the shining black of his father. His wings were pressed flat against his body, and he was shaking. Not from cold but from fear. His golden eyes tracked Kate's every movement as she slowly approached the nest. "Hey there, little guy," Kate said softly, kneeling down to his level. She kept her voice gentle and calm. Rough first week, huh? The walls were covered with medical charts and treatment protocols. Kate started reading through them and her jaw tightened with each page. Brutal exercise regimens designed to force the wings to move. Forced ignition protocols that tried to shock the flame sacs into activity. Starvation schedules based on some ancient belief that hunger would awaken his inner fire. It was torture disguised as medicine. Kate had seen this before. Back on Earth, she'd worked with children whose parents or doctors pushed them too hard, too fast, trying to force development instead of supporting it. The results were always the same. The kids shut down. They became traumatized, afraid to even try. Prince RYX wasn't broken. He was scared out of his mind. Kate reached out slowly and gently stroked the scales along his neck. They were warm and surprisingly soft. "We're going to try something different," she whispered. "I promise." For the first time since hatching, Prince RYX stopped shaking. General Draven stood in the observation gallery high above the royal nursery, his massive arms crossed over his armored chest. His expression was dark with disapproval. Below him, through the reinforced glass, he could see the human woman doing something that made his blood boil. She was singing. Actually singing in some primitive earth language, her voice soft and melodic. And worse, Prince RYX was curled up in her lap like some kind of pet, his eyes closed, breathing steadily in peaceful sleep. "This is an outrage," Draven muttered, his voice a low growl. He turned to Emperor Vorith, who stood beside him watching the scene below. "Your Majesty, the heir to 17 star systems is being coddled like a household pet. This human female is making him soft. Weak. He'll never be a proper warrior at this rate." Vorith didn't take his eyes off his son. For the first time in weeks, the hatchling was sleeping peacefully. No trembling. No whimpering. No signs of the constant fear that had gripped him since hatching. "She's making him calm," the Emperor said quietly. The physicians made him afraid. "There's a difference." Down in the nursery, Kate completely ignored the cameras mounted in every corner. She knew they were watching. She knew they were judging every move she made. She didn't care. On her very first day, she'd taken all those medical charts and protocols and dumped them in the recycling unit. Then she'd started over from scratch, doing things her way. She spent the first week just observing RYX, watching how he moved, what scared him, what interested him. Then she dove into studying draconian anatomy like she was back in school cramming for final exams. She cross-referenced everything with human child development, looking for patterns and similarities. What she discovered changed everything. The wing problem wasn't genetic like the physicians claimed. It was muscular atrophy caused by stress and forced movements before his body was ready. They'd been trying to make him fly before his muscles had developed enough to support the movement. It was like trying to make a human baby run a marathon before they'd learned to walk. Of course it wasn't working. Kate got to work building a completely different environment. She created a padded play area with soft materials, different textures and varying heights. Nothing dangerous, nothing forcing him to perform. Just opportunities to explore at his own pace. She turned wing exercises into games, making them fun instead of painful. When RYX managed even the smallest flutter of his wings, she'd cheer like he'd just won the Galactic Championships. "Good job, RYX. You flapped 3 times. That's a new record." Her enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. She celebrated every tiny achievement, no matter how small it seemed to the observers above. The draconian staff thought she'd lost her mind. They whispered among themselves that she was treating the future emperor like a human child, not a dragon prince. Some openly laughed at her methods. But Kate had worked with enough difficult cases to know that progress took time and patience. She stuck to her approach. The results spoke for themselves. After 2 weeks, RYX was eating regularly without being forced. His scales began to brighten, taking on a healthier shine. After a month, he was actually playing, exploring his environment with curiosity instead of fear. He'd chirp happily when Kate entered the room each morning. After 6 weeks, something remarkable happened. RYX managed to hover for 3 full seconds before landing safely in Kate's outstretched arms. The nursery erupted with her excited cheering. The observation gallery fell into stunned silence. The physicians demanded to examine him immediately. They ran every scan in their medical database, checking and rechecking the results. The data didn't lie. Prince RYX's wing muscles were developing rapidly, exceeding all their projections. His flame sacs were showing activity for the first time, warming up gradually. The senior physician, a dragon who'd served the royal family for 2 centuries, stared at the scans in complete disbelief. "How is a human doing what we could not?" he asked Kate directly during one of their required progress meetings. Kate looked up from playing with RYX and shrugged simply. I'm not treating him like a broken dragon that needs to be fixed. I'm treating him like a kid who needs support to grow at his own pace. But not everyone was celebrating the progress. General Draven's opposition grew louder and more aggressive with each passing week. He began making speeches to the Grand Council, warning anyone who would listen that a human-raised prince would bring shame and weakness to the empire. He painted dramatic pictures of their future emperor being soft, unable to command respect, incapable of the ruthless decisions that ruling required. The pressure on Emperor Vorith intensified daily. Council members approached him in hallways at state dinners, during military briefings. How could they allow a prey-species mammal to shape their future ruler? How could they trust a human, of all creatures, with something so important? Humans were weak, emotional, illogical. Everyone knew that. The arguments were compelling, and Vorith felt the weight of tradition pressing down on him. 10,000 years of draconian culture couldn't be wrong, could it? Maybe Draven was right. Maybe he was making a terrible mistake. But then he'd walk into the nursery unannounced and see his son. Really see him. RYX would be laughing, playing, attempting new movements with confidence instead of fear. Kate would be encouraging him, celebrating his efforts, providing the support he needed to keep trying. And Vorith would remember what his son had looked like before she arrived. Trembling. Terrified. Barely clinging to life. The Emperor couldn't bring himself to dismiss her. Not yet. Not when his son was finally thriving. Let the council complain. Let Draven make his speeches. For now Kate stayed. 3 months into her contract, Kate sat cross-legged on the polished nursery floor, her legs starting to go numb from sitting in the same position for over an hour. RYX was determined today. More determined than she'd ever seen him. He kept climbing back up onto the low practice platform she'd built, spreading his wings, and launching himself into short glides across the room. Each attempt got him a little farther. 5 feet. 7 feet. 10 feet. Then his wings would tire and he'd land awkwardly, sometimes tumbling onto the padded mats Kate had strategically placed everywhere. But he never gave up. Each time he landed, Kate would be right there, helping him up, checking him over for any injuries and offering words of encouragement. You're getting stronger every day, Kate said, gently adjusting one of his wings that had folded slightly wrong. She could feel the muscles beneath his scales, so much stronger now than when she'd first arrived. Remember what we talked about. It's not about being perfect right out of the gate. It's about being better than you were yesterday. And you've already beaten yesterday's record twice. RYX made a chirping sound, something between a purr and a trill. It was a happy noise, one that nobody had heard from him before Kate arrived. The physicians in the observation gallery had commented on it several times, noting it in their reports as unusual vocalization patterns, possibly indicating emotional development. The little dragon climbed the platform one more time. Kate could see him taking deeper breaths, focusing himself. His golden eyes locked onto a spot across the nursery, much farther than he'd ever attempted before. Then he spread his wings wide, really stretched them out, and launched himself forward with powerful kicks from his back legs. Kate watched with her heart in her throat as RYX glided across the entire nursery. 20 feet of sustained, controlled flight. His wings stayed steady, catching the air just right. His body remained level and balanced. He wasn't just falling with style anymore. He was actually flying. He landed smoothly on all 4 legs, his claws clicking perfectly on the floor. The observation gallery above erupted in chaos. Dragons were shouting, pointing, and rushing to get a better view. Emperor Vorith actually stood up from his seat, his massive frame blocking the view of 3 courtiers sitting behind him. They didn't complain. They were too busy staring at the miracle happening below. He flew, one of the physicians whispered, his voice trembling. The defective prince actually flew. Kate was already on her feet, running across the nursery to scoop RYX up in a huge hug. She was laughing and crying at the same time, spinning him around while he chirped excitedly. You did it. I knew you could. That was amazing. But Kate wasn't done pushing boundaries. 4 weeks now, she'd been researching the flame sac problem, reading everything she could find about draconian fire-breathing biology. She developed a theory that the royal physicians thought was completely ridiculous. They insisted that dragon fire was purely biological, nothing more than a chemical reaction triggered by adrenaline and aggression. The more stressed and angry a dragon was, the hotter their flames burned. Kate thought they had it backwards. She'd been watching RYX carefully, taking detailed notes. His flame sacs warmed up when he was happy, when he felt safe and content. The physicians had been trying to trigger his fire through stress and fear, using loud noises and threatening situations. They were doing the exact opposite of what would actually work. That evening, after the observation gallery had finally emptied and they had the nursery to themselves, Kate sat down with RYX in their usual quiet corner. "Want to try something new?" she asked, keeping her voice calm and soothing. RYX tilted his head, curious but trusting. He settled into a comfortable position, giving her his full attention. "I need you to close your eyes and think about your favorite things," Kate said softly, placing a gentle hand on his chest where she could feel the faint warmth of his developing flame sacs. "Think about flying today. Remember how amazing that felt. Think about how proud you were. Think about being warm and safe right here with me. Think about love." RYX closed his eyes, his breathing slowing as he concentrated. Kate could feel the heat building under her palm, growing warmer by the second. His chest began to glow, first a soft orange then deepening to red. The light pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Kate held her breath, barely daring to hope. A tiny flame flickered from RYX's snout. It was no bigger than a candle flame, dancing and wavering in the air. But it was real fire. Actual dragon fire. Yes. Kate jumped to her feet, laughing with pure joy. "You did it. RYX, you breathed fire." The flame sputtered out almost immediately, and a small ember drifted down onto Kate's sleeve. She patted it out quickly, not caring about the small scorch mark left behind. She was too busy grinning at RYX, who looked absolutely amazed at himself. He stared at his own snout like it had betrayed him by suddenly working correctly. The nursery door burst open. Emperor Vorith stood there, breathing hard from having sprinted all the way from the observation deck. He stared at his son, then at Kate with her singed sleeve, then back at RYX. His expression was one of complete shock. "Impossible," he breathed, barely able to form words. "Nope," Kate said, still beaming with pride. "Just different." For a moment, everything was perfect. They'd done it. They'd proven everyone wrong. RYX wasn't defective. He just needed a different approach. But their celebration was short-lived. That very night, General Draven called for an emergency Grand Council meeting. Kate wasn't allowed to attend, but she heard about it within hours. Draven's message was clear and brutal. The human success proved nothing meaningful. Parlor tricks and baby steps weren't enough. The real test was whether the prince could survive as a true dragon, under real pressure, facing real danger. And there was only one way to prove that. The Trial of Ascension. The ancient test designed for adolescent dragons, the one that killed 1 in 10 participants even when they were fully grown and trained. Emperor Vorith had 7 days to make his decision. 7 days to choose between his son's safety and his son's future as emperor. The Grand Council chamber buzzed with tension so thick you could almost taste it. 50 draconian nobles filled the massive hall, each one representing an entire star system. These weren't just politicians. They were warriors, generals, and ancient dragons who'd seen centuries of war and peace. The chamber itself was carved from volcanic stone, with viewing crystals mounted on every wall showing live feeds from across the empire. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a trial. General Draven stood at the center podium, his voice booming through the hall like thunder. Every word was calculated, designed to stir emotions and sway opinions. "The prince has shown improvement, yes. I will not deny what we have all witnessed. But let us be clear about what improvement means. Improvement is not mastery. Progress is not completion. Our enemies across the galaxy will not care that he had a difficult hatching. They will not give him sympathy or time to develop at his own pace." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "They will see weakness and they will strike without mercy. The Trial of Ascension has been our tradition for 10,000 years. It has separated the worthy from the unworthy since before any of us were hatched. If Prince RYX is to rule 17 star systems, if he is to command our fleets and lead our people, he must prove himself worthy according to our ways. Not human ways. Our ways." The council erupted in agreement. Voices shouted support for Draven's position. Fists pounded on stone tables. The sound was deafening. Kate stood in the observation alcove reserved for non-council members, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles had turned white. She could barely breathe. That morning, Emperor Vorith had taken her aside and explained exactly what the Trial of Ascension involved. The explanation had made her stomach turn. The flame chasm was a volcanic labyrinth deep beneath the palace, a natural formation that the Draconians had been using for their coming-of-age ritual for millennia. Adolescent dragons, usually around 3 years old, were released into the maze. They had to navigate superheated tunnels where the air itself could burn your lungs. They had to avoid toxic gas pockets that erupted without warning. They had to fly through collapsing passages where tons of rock could crush them in seconds. It was designed to test everything: survival instincts, flight capabilities under pressure, fire immunity, problem-solving skills, and pure determination. 1 in 10 didn't make it out alive. And those were fully developed adolescent dragons who'd been training for years. RYX was 4 months old. The youngest dragon to ever attempt the trial in recorded history had been 3 years old. And that dragon had barely survived. "Your Majesty," Kate said, turning to Emperor Vorith who stood beside her in the alcove. Her voice was shaking with barely controlled anger and fear. "This is suicide. You know it is. He's not ready for something like this. He just learned to fly 3 days ago. His flames are still barely stronger than a match. This isn't a test. It's an execution with extra steps." Vorith's expression was carved from stone, but Kate could see the pain in his ancient eyes. "If I refuse the Council's demand," he replied quietly, his voice heavy with centuries of accumulated sorrow, "they will declare him unfit to rule. They'll say I'm showing favoritism, that I'm weak, that I'm allowing emotion to cloud my judgment. They will exile him or worse. Some of the more traditional members would demand his immediate death to preserve the purity of our bloodline. This trial, as terrible as it is the only path that gives him any chance at a future." Kate wanted to scream. She wanted to grab RYX and run, steal a ship and disappear to some distant corner of the galaxy where ancient traditions didn't matter. But she knew that was impossible. There was nowhere in 17 star systems where they could hide from the Empire. That night, Kate didn't even try to sleep. She sat on the floor of the nursery with RYX curled up in her lap, holding him as close as she dared without making him uncomfortable. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the palace lights filtering through the windows. She'd taught him to fly short distances. She'd helped him breathe his first small flames. But the trial of ascension required skills and endurance he simply didn't have yet. No amount of encouragement or positive reinforcement could change the laws of physics or biology. "Listen to me," Kate whispered into the quiet darkness, stroking RYX's scales gently. "Tomorrow is going to be scary. Really, really scary. I won't lie to you about that. But I need you to remember something important." RYX lifted his head, his golden eyes reflecting the dim light. He was listening with that intense focus he'd developed over their months together. "You've already done impossible things," Kate continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Every single dragon expert in this empire said you'd never fly. They said your wings were too damaged, that you were too weak. But you proved them wrong. They said you'd never breathe fire. But you did. You've already proven everyone wrong about what you can and cannot do." She took a shaky breath, fighting back tears. "Tomorrow, when you're down there in the dark and it feels like too much, I need you to remember that I'm up here. I'll be watching every second. I'll be cheering for you every step of the way. And no matter what happens down there, no matter what, I believe in you. You are stronger and smarter than anyone gives you credit for." RYX pressed his head against her chest, right over her heart. His scales were warm, warmer than they'd been months ago. He made a soft chirping sound, the one that meant he understood and trusted her. Kate held him close, memorizing the feeling, terrified it might be the last time. 2 years had passed since that terrifying day in the flame chasm. Kate stood in the Imperial Gardens, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea as she watched 12 young dragons practice flight maneuvers in the open courtyard. They swooped and dived, their wings catching the afternoon sunlight, their calls of excitement echoing off the palace walls. Just 6 months ago, every single one of these hatchlings had been deemed defective by traditional draconian standards. Too small. Too weak. Wrong wing shape. Slow flame development. All the familiar complaints. Now they were thriving. Laughing. Playing. Learning. All under the care of human specialists that Kate had personally trained in her methods. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. The Draconian Empire had fundamentally changed, and Kate was still trying to wrap her head around it. Emperor Vorith had created an entirely new position just for her. Imperial Advisor on Development. The title came with an office, a staff, and the authority to implement her protocols across all 17 star systems. Her approach, emphasizing psychological security, individualized training plans and positive reinforcement, had become the new standard. The old brutal methods were being phased out, written out of medical textbooks, replaced with something gentler and infinitely more effective. The statistics told the story better than words ever could. Hatchling mortality rates had dropped by 70% in just 2 years. More dragons were reaching full maturity stronger, healthier, and more psychologically balanced than any previous generation in recorded history. The Empire was producing not just survivors, but genuinely happy, well-adjusted dragons. The shift hadn't been easy or smooth. Far from it. General Draven had resigned his position in loud, public protest, giving a blistering speech about the corruption of traditional values and the weakening of the Empire. He'd taken an entire faction of hardcore traditionalists with him, retreating to one of the outer systems where they'd established their own separate colony. But then something unexpected happened. Those same traditionalists started having their own hatchlings. When some of those babies showed signs of developmental issues, the parents faced a terrible choice: stick to tradition and watch their children struggle, or swallow their pride and try the human methods. One by one they started coming back. Quietly at first, embarrassed and reluctant. Then in larger numbers. Even General Draven eventually returned, though it took him 18 months. He'd stood before Emperor Vorith with his head bowed and grudgingly admitted that strength took many forms, and that perhaps 10,000 years of tradition didn't automatically make something correct. It was the closest thing to an apology the proud warrior could manage. Prince RYX had become the living symbol of the Empire's transformation. Now approaching adolescence, he'd grown into a magnificent dragon. He could fly faster than dragons twice his age, pulling maneuvers that left veteran pilots stunned. His flames burned hot enough to melt titanium, and he'd earned the genuine respect of every single warrior in the military academy, even the ones who'd initially doubted him. But what truly set RYX apart wasn't his physical abilities. It was his mind. His approach to leadership. He settled disputes through careful diplomacy before ever considering force. He questioned traditions that no longer served their purpose, asking uncomfortable questions that made the older generation squirm. And most controversially, he openly advocated for alliances with species the Empire had once considered beneath them, including humans. Kate's official contract had ended over a year ago, but she'd stayed on as RYX's personal advisor and, more importantly, as his friend. She'd watched him grow from that tiny, trembling hatchling into this confident young dragon who was already changing his world. On this particular afternoon, Kate found him in his private study, surrounded by data tablets and holographic displays. He was reviewing proposals for the upcoming Grand Council Summit, making notes and muttering to himself. She leaned against the doorway, smiling at how serious he looked. "You're going to propose the Earth Alliance today?" she asked casually. RYX looked up, his golden eyes bright with determination and just a hint of nervousness. "The Council will fight it. I know they will. They'll call humans weak, primitive, unworthy of partnership with dragons. They'll say I'm being sentimental because you raised me." "Yeah, they probably will," Kate agreed, walking into the room. "So what are you going to tell them?" RYX stood up from his desk, moving to the window that overlooked the capital city. "The truth," he said simply. "That the weakest moment of my life became my greatest strength because a human refused to give up on me when everyone else had. That the Empire grows stronger when we embrace different perspectives and different ways of thinking, not when we reject them out of pride or stubbornness." He turned to face her, and Kate was struck by how much he'd grown. His wings unfurled slowly, massive now, scarred from years of intense training but incredibly powerful. He was everything his father had hoped for and so much more. "I'll tell them that you taught me something no Draconian could," RYX continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "That compassion isn't weakness like we've always believed. It's actually the foundation of real strength. That caring about others, supporting them, helping them grow, those aren't things to be ashamed of. They're the things that build lasting power." Kate felt tears pricking her eyes. She walked over and placed her hand on his foreleg, small against his scales. "You're going to be an amazing emperor." "I'm going to try," RYX said softly. "And I learned from the best." That evening, Kate stood in the council gallery watching RYX address the 50 most powerful dragons in the Empire. His speech was passionate, logical, and deeply personal. He spoke about his journey, about human innovation, about the future he envisioned where strength came from unity rather than dominance. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it passed. The Draconian Empire and Earth would become formal allies. As Kate watched the council members file out, many stopping to bow respectfully to her, she realized something profound. She'd come here to save one dragon. Instead, she'd help transform an empire. And that was the most human thing possible, changing the world by refusing to give up on a single life.